So you're going to help me.
So you want us to write the sermon or what?
Times your service.
No.
He did that the last time, didn't he? We had the sermon.
Well,
Or was that Pastor Poppy? He
That was
said-
Pastor
Oh,
Poppy.
yeah, he said, well, whatever we had, and sure enough, he kind of went down some of the stuff we covered.
Yeah, well, we, as you know, the last time I was here, and we spent almost all the time in the Old Testament lesson, so it was an hour and a half, and so there's no way you're gonna get an hour and a half sermon, so, you know. And we got a little bit of that today. So let's start with Isaiah 7:10-14, that's the Old Testament lesson, appointed for this day, or this weekend. Let's read it together. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. But Ahaz said, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. Then Isaiah said, Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Okay, first question. When have you ever looked for or received a sign that would determine a choice you were faced with? It happened to me traveling down the road to come here. Right? You look for a gas station sign, and that determines the choice you're going to make. Or on the way home, we stopped halfway from Asheville, and so we were right near Louisville, and just north of Louisville. And so then we were looking for a hotel sign because we didn't prearrange that one. We were just going to see how far we could drive. And so yeah, you just kind of look for those kind of signs that predetermine what you're going to do. But do you ever have a sign like this, something that you said, well, if this happens, then this?
Yeah, but I don't remember, but there's so many of them, it seems like. You know, you really want to go here, and you wind up going there.
There.
And then you see why you weren't here. But I just gave up.
Yeah. Did you ever ask for a sign?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I didn't ask for a sign, but I asked for help. I was at work. I still remember this. This still strikes me. I was at work, and I was the director of quality at the county mental health complex, and I was having trouble because I didn't have enough staff. And I had all these projects to be done, and nobody would do it except me and a couple people that were already overwhelmed. And I was sitting at my desk, and I said, God, please help me. Tell me what to do here. I need some help. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it, how to get all this work done. So I was sitting there praying. And in the door walked a nurse who walked up to my secretary and said, do you have any job openings available in this department? I'm like, I can't believe it. I mean, that was an immediate answer to a prayer, but I didn't ask for a sign. I asked for help, and it was right there. I couldn't believe it. And she turned out to be one of the best people I ever hired. So, yeah.
Right place, right time. Jerry will do that often when she loses something, or can't find something. She'll pause and she'll pray. And for some reason, that often, I don't know what it is, but she'll often find it in the next minute or so.
Well, I do that a lot because I'm losing stuff. I try to remember where I put stuff, but then you walk out of the room and I say, okay, God, I just need a little patience. And you walk in from a different angle and you see you really did put it in the wrong place, but there it is, right in front of you.
I walk in and I go, what did I come in here for? I don't remember why I came here.
It's not your, it's your brain, it's not your age.
Oh,
It's if you go through a doorway, if you don't concentrate on you won't remember what you went for going through a doorway. That's just what your mind does, which is very weird. So you have to keep saying.
Well, I have a weird mind because it happens to be
All the time.
Well, I think it happens to a lot of us.
Yeah, and I've not done this, but I've known people who have done this, and they call it putting out the fleece. Picking up on Gideon. you know, with the fleece on the ground and that kind of thing. And that's a case of somebody who asked for a sign. And here God says, ask for a sign, and I'll give it to you. And
What does this mean though, the deepest depths and the high, what does that mean? I don't get what that means.
whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights, in other words, ask for anything. It's a way of saying, you know, you're not going to stump God. He's going to figure out a way to, you know, is it a bird, you know, or something like that that's going to, a light, or what will it be that's going to be a sign for you? Just ask for a sign.
Oh, I got a weird one. I don't know. After Dennis passed away, he had said to remember him with a cardinal. Cardinal was a big deal, you know. And I have a big thing with birds, you know, but that week I had like 15 cardinals sitting in a tree across. I'd never seen that many. I have 2 pair of cardinals that live in my backyard all the time, but they do travel in groups in winter.
Huh.
But I had never seen that many cardinals sitting in the tree that week. And I don't know, I take that as a serious sign, because that never happened before, and it never will happen again, I'm sure. But that was comforting, you might say.
I've never seen that many cardinals together ever.
No, but they can
Travel.
do that, but,
Well, to get a little bit of a background on what's going on here, you really got to read the context. So if we go back to 2 Kings chapter 16. 2 Kings chapter 16. It covers the same time period that this prophecy occurs. And so to get some background, we want to read a little bit about Ahaz.
2 Kings what?
2 Kings chapter 16. And I'll start because of the names. So I'll read the first paragraph and just pause there. Okay, chapter 16, verse 1. In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, Ahaz, son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. So, unlike David his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of his God. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and even sacrificed his son in the fire, following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops and under every spreading tree. So this is a guy who's not very faithful to God. They had been warned by Moses not to engage in the sacrifice of children back in the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Instead, and you say, well, what about the sacrifice thing? Well, how did Israel sacrifice their sons? There was a sacrifice. They what?
Oh, yeah, the substitute.
They had a substitute. That's right. And depending on, that's why, remember, Jesus went, and his parents took him to the temple to dedicate him. If you were rich, you used lamb or goat. If you were poor, you used a couple of doves, and that's what Mary and Joseph knew, so we know what social strata they were in. But you had to redeem your son. The son belonged to God, and you had to redeem him to pay a price to get him back, basically. And that comes out of the whole Exodus thing. And so there was a sacrifice that God commanded, but it was a substitute sacrifice, not sacrificing your own child. But the fact that God warns them against that back in the books of Moses tells us that it was a practice that was already well known by the Israelites at that time. Somebody want to pick up their, well, why don't I read that one too? That's a bunch of names. Then, oops, I got to go back. Then Rezin, king of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem and besieged Ahaz, but they could not overpower him. At that time, Rezin, king of Aram, recovered Elath for Aram by driving out the men of Judah. Edomites then moved into Elath and have lived there to this very day. So they took advantage of taking over a town. Somebody want to pick up there with verse 7?
Ahaz sent messengers to say to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, I am your servant and vassal. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Aram and of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. And Ahaz took the silver and gold found in the temple of the Lord and in the treasuries of the royal palace, and sent it as a gift to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria complied by attacking Damascus and capturing it. He deported its inhabitants to Kir and put reason to death.
Okay.
Continue, Bert.
Yep. So what did Ahaz do? He relied on a foreign power, Assyria, in order to defeat. And he said he was a vassal, and that means he had to be paying some kind of tax to the Assyrian for protection. And you notice that he took stuff out of the temple, so things that were dedicated to God were used in order to purchase, in effect, the defeat of their enemies. What's more, we see that he picks up some of the pagan temple practices also from the king of Assyria. So this is the next paragraph. Somebody want to pick that up for starting verse 10?
Then King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. He saw an altar in Damascus and sent to Uriah the priest to sketch of the altar with detailed plans for its construction. So Uriah the priest built an altar in accordance with all the plans that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus, and finished it before King Ahaz returned. When the king came back from Damascus and saw the altar, he approached it and presented offerings on it. He offered up his burnt offering and grain offering, poured out his drink offering, and sprinkled the blood of the fellowship offering on the altar. The bronze altar that stood before the Lord he brought from the front of the temple, from between the new altar and the temple of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the new altar.
So here he takes a pagan altar and has it built, and then moves the altar that God had designed and given them descriptions for back in the books of Moses. He moves the bronze altar away from where it had been. King Ahaz then gave these orders to Uriah the priest: on the large new altar, offer the morning burnt offering and the evening grain offering, the king's burnt offering and his grain offering, and the burnt offering of all the people of the land, their grain offering and their drink offering. Sprinkle on the altar all the blood of the burnt offerings and sacrifices. But I will use the bronze altar for seeking guidance. And Uriah the priest did just as Ahaz had said. So you've got the, and I don't care if you've got your study note, if you want to pick up the notes about the altars in 1615.
Okay. It says a large new altar. Even though fire from heaven had inaugurated and sanctioned the use of the bronze altar for the worship of the Lord, Ahaz now replaced it with an altar built on the pattern of the pagan altar from Damascus. Although the bronze altar was quite large, the new altar was larger. And then it goes on to talk about the morning bird offering and the evening grain offering. There is no other reference to these special offerings of the king in the Old Testament, with the possible exception of Ezekiel's depiction of the offerings of a future prince. And then it says, I will use the bronze altar for seeking guidance. It says, seeking omens by the examination of the entrails of sacrificed animals is well attested in ancient Near Eastern texts. Here Ahaz states his intention to follow an Assyrian divination technique in an attempt to sacrifice to secure the Lord's guidance.
Guidance, yeah. I'm just curious how you find out from an animal's entrails what God's saying to you. I know it was practiced, as it says in a lot of Near Eastern texts. This is something that was practiced.
It's like reading tea leaves.
Yeah.
It depends upon the position, and like he's saying in the notes here too, is he has some interpreters. So he's not the one that's reading it.
That's
he's
reading it,
somebody
yeah.
else. And
I do
so-
have a note in my Bible too that says, I won't read all of it, but just about the shapes, colors, and markings of the entrails.
Entrails.
Were thought to reveal messages from the gods about the future. And then, by blending elements of Canaanite, Assyrian, and Israelite religions, Ahaz hoped to attain the best possible guidance. However, his worship was worthless in God's eyes.
Wow.
So that's a
Covering his bases, yeah. The wrong basis.
Yeah, so that's the kind of guy that Ahaz was, and not very faithful, and so he was using the bronze altar because that's the altar on which they did the animal sacrifices. So he's using the other altar for the grain offerings, and he's using this one for the animal sacrifice. So when you split the animal open, what do you see? You have people who can read the entrails, and of course none of this is anything that that God had ordered. And you notice the priest just does what the king says, right? And then it just finishes up. King Ahaz took away the side panels, removed the basins from the movable stands. He removed the sea from the bronze bowls that supported it and set it on a stone base. He took away the Sabbath canopy that had been built at the temple and removed the royal entryway outside the temple of the Lord in deference to the king of Israel, of Assyria. As for the other events of the reign of Ahaz and what he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Ahaz rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David, and Hezekiah, his son, succeeded him. So there's a little bit about Ahaz. Now let's go back to Isaiah. And if you go back to Isaiah for the, I have a reference to 6:1 because that says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne. Well, what else happened in the year that Uzziah died? His son Ahaz took over the throne. So Isaiah gets his call. This is the call experience, the commission experience of Isaiah. With the angels and seraphs and holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. All of that happened at the beginning of the reign of Ahaz. And so this happened a number of years later, the sign of Emmanuel. Now to get started there, and this is why we were back in 2 Kings, is because the same people are mentioned at the beginning of verse 1. So when Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Now, remember, the kingdom is divided now, and you've got the northern kingdom, which is the kingdom of Israel. You got the southern kingdom, which is the kingdom of Judah. So here you got the northern king marching up to fight against Jerusalem to take over the southern kingdom as well.
I'm confused now because the last thing that we just read in Kings talked about, it said Ahaz, David was his father.
Yeah.
Well,
And
Well,
now it
David-
says,
ancestral father.
That's his ancestral father.
oh,
So he's a son of David because, just like Jesus is the son of David, so they say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on us, right? Because whoever your father was, the way that, this is the way it's been explained to me, the way that Jews thought about it is that inside Abraham, for instance, inside his seed, were all the descendants. So anybody who's from Abraham's physical line could be called a son of Abraham.
Oh, I see,
And in the same way, anybody who's directly descended from David would be called a son of David. So yeah, but here's what's happening. The northern kingdom, and that's based in Damascus, in the north, comes against the southern kingdom. So what we read in the previous chapter about then Assyria coming over. So this is before Assyria has been contacted. Okay? Somebody want to pick up with the rest of the stuff that goes up to our text? So that's 2 to 6 of chapter 7.
Now the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken, as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub,
Which means the remnant will return.
to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the washerman's field.
That's pretty specific, isn't
Wow.
it?
Say to him, Be careful, be calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram, and of the son of Remaliah. Aram, Ephraim, and Remaliah's son have plotted your ruin, saying, Let us invade Judah, let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves, and make the son of Talil king over it. Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place, it will not happen, for the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 45 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria. With the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all.
So what does he tell him? Don't worry about it. God's got your back.
I have 65 years instead of 45
Yeah,
years.
65, I think it's just a
Did I read it wrong?
You said 45, but it's 60.
So he's saying these people who are arrayed against you, they're all going to be destroyed. And now
Verse 8.
comes our text. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. So here's where the sign comes in, is you've got Jerusalem under siege by the northern kingdom, allied with two other foreign powers, and they're the ones who are attacking Jerusalem. And Ahaz is saying, I've got to defeat them, I don't have the power to do it myself, so I'm going to send to Assyria for help. And God is saying, don't do it. You don't need to go to Assyria for help. And that's what Isaiah is saying. And then he says, but Ahaz said, I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the test. So the question then is the third question. Now, this war, by the way, is known as the Syro-Ephraimite War of 735, 734 BC. So there's extra biblical history that helps us to understand when all this happened. What do we understand about Ahaz's response here? Was this unbelief, humility, or some other expression of his heart? What was his alternative plan? Well, we already read it in 2 Kings. So what do you think?
I think he's stuck on himself. I think he's too proud. He thinks he knows it all.
He's already shown that he doesn't trust
Yeah, and trust
God.
God. I mean, if you trusted God, I mean, there's so many times in the Bible where, where people might have questioned it but followed through, and that God would reveal this army of angels or would reveal what he has in store. But the fact that he's turning him down, he's not going to see what God has planned because he's turning him down, he's not trusting him.
And it doesn't say it here, but it said it back in 2 Kings, that he did not have a heart like his father David. What does that mean? In the Bible, it occurs a few times when it says that David had a heart after God. What does that mean? What does this mean?
You can see in the Psalms, he not only trusted God, he absolutely loved God, and he knew for everything. I mean, you read the Psalms, and it's like, you know, David lived a tenuous life. He had a lot of enemies out there. And
Well, he did a lot of stupid stuff.
Well, he
so
did a lot
that's-
of stupid
That's
stuff.
where some people say, well, what does it mean that David has a heart after God if he did such?
Because God forgave him, and isn't that a good reflection for us? Isn't that a good reflection where we do a lot of stupid stuff too?
Where it is explained, and I forget where, I should have looked it up for you today, but where it's explained is in this way. That David had a heart after God, that he did not worship other gods. So what Ahaz is doing is something David would never do. He would not offer sacrifices to another god. He would not go to another prophet of another god for advice or counsel. When it says in the Bible that David had a heart after God, it doesn't mean that he was perfect. It doesn't mean he always followed God's will. But what it means is that he recognized nobody else as God beside the true God. He never was involved in the worship of the false gods of the Palestinians. Unlike, the others, both before and after him, Saul consulted the witch at Endor. Yeah. And Saul had house gods. How do we know that? Well, because remember when David married Michal, his daughter, the one time when they were after him, she hid one of her idols under some sheets, covered it up, so when people came in and looked, they thought David was still in bed. Well, what did she use? She used idol. And this was always the warning that God gave to David, Solomon, and the other kings, is to be careful about who you have as a wife, because if she has idols, she's going to bring them in and may convince you to follow them as well.
That was Solomon's downfall.
Mm-hmm. So you've got this this situation where you've got a king who is not true to the only true God. He's trying to mix all these different kinds of religions together and acting like it's okay.
Well, one way of saying you're not trusting God, I mean, I think it's your fear that's taking over. And I mean, Ahaz is trying to cover all the bases. He's afraid.
He's afraid.
And you think about it in our world today, there's so many things to fear. That if you don't have trust, that's going to be just taking you over. I mean, and there are times you just feel, oh, what's going to happen? What is going to happen with this?
I think all that, but then I try to remember that today has enough trouble in itself. So if I live
That is true, we do.
one day at a time,
Yeah.
and not to worry about what happened in the past, and try. It's hard,
But
but
the other
It's good
side of that
advice.
is when you start thinking about the blessing that you have, that you are, though you may have fears, I mean, I'm thinking about myself, though I may have fears, I know that I don't have to give in to them because of all the things that God protects us with. I mean, think of these people that are doing these crazy things right now with children. It's terrifying.
yeah, can't even deal with it.
Yeah, whenever I think about those kind of things, it was a contemporary Christian songwriter who, and I don't, the phrase just goes like this: I know not what the future holds, Lord, I have no way of knowing, but I know the one who holds my future and the place to where I'm going. And the word picture I always have is how sometimes when you're in a place of discomfort or fear, just the presence of another person cares about you can take away that fear. As a child sometimes, when they're scared, as long as they can grab your leg, and you're right there, they know that you're gonna protect them, everything's gonna be all right, not because of what scaring them got removed from the situation, or you pick them up and hold them. Sometimes I think about nurses who often have this ministry of presence with people, you know, where when you have the opportunity to know somebody who just needs somebody to be there, that you often are that person who can
Just
Well,
hold their hand.
just hold their hand. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's,
Becca had a lot of
it's-
those experiences, and she had, because she was in ICU all those years, she had several people from St. John's come through her ICU. And, I remember when Krieger's wife died. Ken-
Dixie?
Ken, yeah, and,
Dixie.
yeah, and Becca was there, and, he always called her my babysitter's daughter, cause I babysat for them when I was
Oh, yeah.
a kid, you know. But he went away feeling much better about it because she spent time with him.
yeah,
And I mean, she's not supposed to talk about stuff like that, you know, but occasionally she'd ask somebody, can I tell my mom that you were here,
Yeah.
whatever, and then, you know, but it was a lot of people like that. She was there for them. It's, you guys are amazing. I know that.
it's that, they often refer to as a administrative presence. It's, you know, and sometimes you have to say to people, I know they told us when we were in training as pastors, sometimes, shut up. You don't have to say anything. You know, you walk into a challenging situation, just be there. And very often they'll give you the cue as to when it's appropriate to talk and what it is they exactly might need.
And
And
I think
thanks-
Pastor Poppy said that on Sunday too. He said, and it reminded me of you know, that you can witness to people, but when necessary, use words.
Yeah,
You don't have to use words
Yeah.
all the time.
And thank you for being there for my sister. I said, you know, she did talk a lot.
yeah.
Give her a chance, she talked a lot. And to me, that was important because I think that's why God kept her that live that long time, is because she had to make some amends
Some amends and
and be able, I mean,
kind
she
of get
did
her
say,
house in order. And
yeah, she did tell me she was sorry for all the jerky things she did to me over the years. She thought it was amazing, she said that. And she was grateful that I was there all the time. I mean, I saw her once or twice, I just thought about it, saw her once or twice a week, like for the last 7, 8 years since she got evicted from her house. You know, and did a whole lot of stuff for her over the years.
Yeah,
It's, but the whole idea is listening to these people, and you were there for her, and I thank you for that.
so it's a precious privilege God gives us to be present in people's lives in that way. And Ahaz here says, I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the task. And
So that's some bad.
something
That
gets,
was a cop-out.
Yeah, it's a cop-out. Yeah, that's a good one, that's what I was thinking.
well, yeah.
Yeah, sarcastic. She's got a good line too.
So how does this sign fit the crisis? The kind of comforting sign also warn. The sign is it not enough to try the patience of humans? You can tell that God's a little bit upset with Ahaz by the response, right?
So was Isaiah talking to Ahaz or just?
Yep, Isaiah was talking to Ahaz. And that's where sometimes, you know, with the angel of the Lord stuff, this is where you have to sort it out. But you see in that previous line, again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Well, it was because Isaiah was speaking to him. Because Isaiah is the one who's met him. And he says on behalf of the Lord, ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or the highest. And then he doesn't ask. And so he says, well, God's going to give you a sign anyway. And then comes the promise, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel. Now, to understand the rest of this prophecy, though, you got to read the rest of the promise. I always wonder why they cut it off here in the reading of the Old Testament. So if somebody wants to pick up with verse 15 and read through the end of that paragraph.
He will eat curds and honey there.
Mm-hmm.
He will eat curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. But before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. The Lord will bring on you and on your people and on the house of your fathers a time unlike any since Ephraim broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria.
So he says he's going to eat curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. And they talk about the age of accountability and responsibility. And under the law, that's usually the age of bar mitzvah, which is around 12 or 13 years old. But he says before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. So here's when God gives some of the prophetic promises. I have a book that talks a little bit about this in my library called Messianic Mountaintops. And so here's the deal, is when God gives prophecy, sometimes he has something that's a little bit more immediate and closer to the situation and something that's further out. And the reason why the book is called Messianic Mountaintops is because he'll put them in the same context. And the analogy is this: when you're driving up to something like the Rockies and you're far away, it looks like those mountains are all one right on top of each other. But when you actually get there, you realize there's quite a few miles between those peaks. There's a greater distance than you perceive when you're standing at a distance. And so when we're standing at a distance from prophecy, very often he prophesies something that's a little bit closer to the situation and something that's a little bit further away. And you'll find this in a lot of the prophecies that Isaiah does, especially, and this is one of those. So what is he saying? What's the immediate situation? How does this? What's the immediate situation that he's saying? Here's the answer. In the time that a child would reach that age of accountability, whatever age, doesn't say how old it is, the people who are attacking you, they're going to be out of the picture. And again, he's saying, trust me. This is the sign. And you'll know it's me if you just wait. Because you're going to see that they're going to fall apart and you're going to be safe. But of course, we know from 2 Kings, is that what Ahaz did? Nope. He took a bunch of money, sent it over to Assyria, and said, come, take care of my enemies. Rather than relying on God, he relied on the Assyrian power. And that's the rest of the story because of not relying on God. At the same time, the second peak is a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and you will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. El is God. And the Emmanuel, the U is the us in Hebrew, and the Aman is the with. So it's the with us God is the way. If you were reading it literally from the name Emmanuel, it would be the with us God.
I think this part about the curds and honey is interesting. The note in my Bible talks about that a little bit. It says, curds is a kind of yogurt, and honey meant a return to the simple diet of those who lived off the land. The Assyrian invasion would devastate the countryside and make farming impossible.
Well, that's true, because when ancient warfare, when they came through, when an army came through, they absolutely destroyed everything in sight. And they would steal whatever was already harvested in order to feed their troops, because that was the way they resupplied, was by stealing what was there.
And when it talks about what you said about that, when the age of the child,
Or
when
age
this
of-
boy is 12 or 13, he will be eating curds and honey instead of agricultural products. due to the devastation of Israel by Assyria. Some believe that this expression involves a shorter period of time, identical to that in verse 16.
16, yep. Because you might say, well, somebody who knows right and wrong, see, I would peg that at a much younger age.
Go 8.
Much younger age. The kids know right and
8
wrong.
begins the logic.
A toddler
Well,
knows when he's
toddler-
toddler.
But toddlers know when they've done something wrong.
Toddlers know, but they don't analyze it. I mean, you.
But they know when they've done something.
Oh, yeah, they know when they've done something wrong, but,
And that's the problem with this particular prophecy is it's very, we can talk.
mushy.
Yeah, it's
But I guess
what he's saying is it's gonna happen soon.
Well, and that, to me, I never guess I thought about that before. It gives some context to when, I'm assuming it means Jesus when he was a little boy, because it says the boy, and it's right after he will call him Emmanuel and he will eat curds and honey. So that's, Jesus is gonna be in that time frame when this war was going on, right?
No,
No?
nope, this is a Messianic mountaintop. So the application to the local situation is before a child would be born. And this is where some people argue about the word virgin. The virgin will be with child. I don't know whether you've heard this, but some of the more liberal people would say, well, this really wasn't about Jesus at all because it really means a young maiden. And the reality is that the word in Hebrew can mean a young maiden, normally refers to a young maiden who has not had a child.
So then why is he talking about this boy?
And the reason why they talk about that specifically is because when the Greek, when the Septuagint came out, which was a Greek translation of the Hebrew, they chose a word that specifically means a virgin in Greek. So if you ask, well, how did the Hebrews understand this word? They understood it as a virgin, a woman who had not had a child before. Again, this is one of the challenges with prophecy is that it's a messianic mountaintop. So the immediate application is before a child would be conceived and grow up, these kings are going to be gone. But at the same time, God is going to give you a sign. Most scholars think this is a figurative sign that within 9 months this will happen. So if you have do you have your study notes for back up to 7:14? Why don't you read that?
I do have a note that says, like many prophecies, this passage seems to have a double meaning.
Yep.
First, a child, perhaps another son of Isaiah, would be born to a virgin, which could simply refer to a young woman during the time of Ahaz. By the time he was grown, Judah's two enemies, Israel and Aram, would be destroyed. The second meaning was later applied to the birth of Christ, Matthew 1:23, the name Emmanuel, God with us.
Yeah, and if you read the Concordia Study Bible, so here's what they argue about is what does this word Alma mean? Okay, in the Concordia Study Bible, it notes that every time the Hebrew word Alma occurs, and there's only 6 times in the whole Old Testament, every case it refers to a young woman of marriageable age who is still in the state of virginity, and they give you all 6 references there. So some people have said, well, he didn't really mean a virgin when he said this. He just meant a young woman of marriageable age. The problem with that, and that's why the Septuagint always translates it as virgin, is that in every case where it's used in the Bible, you always let Scripture interpret Scripture. Standard principle. You want to know what that word means? Then you look at all the other places where it's used. And it's not just a young woman. It's a young woman of marriageable age who has never had a child. And that's why we believe this is a direct prophecy of the coming of the Christ. She'll be with child, give birth to a son, and you'll call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And what God is saying is in the same space that it takes for a woman to get pregnant and have a child is the time frame in which the the promise of the devastation of the northern tribes are going to happen. But if you go on then at the end in verse 18, somebody want to pick up there? Because now he's going to talk about what's going to happen to them.
In that day, the Lord will whistle for flies from the distant streams of Egypt, and for bees from the land of Assyria. And they will come and settle in the steep ravines and in the crevices in the rocks, on all the thorn bushes and at all the water holes. In that day the Lord will use a razor hired from beyond the river, the king of Assyria, to shave your head and the hair of your legs, and to take off your beards also. In that day a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 goats, and because of the abundance of the milk they give, he will have curds to eat. All who remain in the land will eat curds and honey in that day, and in every place where there were thousands of vines worth 1,000 silver shekels, there will be only briars and thorns. Men will go there with bow and arrow, for the land will be covered with briars and thorns. As for all the hills once cultivated by the hoe, you will no longer go there for fear of the briars and thorns. They will become places where the cattle are turned loose and where the sheep run.
So here's the rest of the explanation of that curds and honey. So he says, I'm going to whistle for flies from the distant streams of Egypt, for bees from the land of Assyria. Now remember that this is the, I won't draw over this, but if you remember, this is the problem with Palestine. If Palestine is on a construct like this, you've got Assyria up here and Egypt down here. They're always fighting over who's going to rule this land that so much of the traffic and trade goes through. And the problem with the Israelites and with both the southern and northern kingdom is in trying to keep the Assyrians at bay. They would sometimes make agreements with the Egyptians, and if they want to keep the Egyptians at bay, they would make allegiances with the Assyrians. During the time of this prophecy, they'd already made that allegiance with the Assyrian, which is why Ahaz sends all the gold up there. But it's always because they're in this battle. So now he says, and this is the image, right? He says he's going to send these from both areas. So you're going to have the bees from Assyria and the flies from Egypt. And so both of them are going to descend to make this place desolate. And here comes the curds and honey. When this happens, what are you going to have left to eat? Curds and honey. And all of the tillable land is going to be briars and thorns. All the vineyards are going to be briars and thorns. All of the great agricultural crops that you've had for all of these years are going to be gone.
It's interesting to think of God whistling.
He says what?
It's interesting to think of God whistling.
I'm going to whistle. Well, and if you really like his names of his kids, it's in the very next place where, in the very next paragraph where it says, take a large scroll, write on it with the ordinary pen, Maher-shalal al-Hashbaz, and I will call on Uriah the priest and Zechariah son of Jechariah as reliable witnesses. And then I went to the prophets, she conceived, gave birth to a son, and the Lord said to me, name him Maher-shalal al-Hashbaz, which if you look at your footnote means quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. How'd you like that for a handle?
Wow.
Maher-shalal al-Hashbaz.
It's
It's almost as good as brown walking.
Pastor
Gotta make
Bob
her
always-
back.
Yeah, he
Um,
just throws his hands up.
Yeah, so you've got that, and you can see how the prophecy is going to develop if you just continue, because now he says the Assyria is going to be the Lord's instrument in bringing punishment to the people of Israel, right? And then in chapter 9 comes then a positive prophecy, another one from Isaiah, to us a child is born, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And then there's more judgment, his anger against Israel and Assyria, And then in chapter 11 comes the branch from Jesse. So you've got this alternating between words of judgment and words of promise about the Messianic servant that's going to come as a son of David, as a son of Jesse, who's going to be the wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Right? Yeah.
I'm just curious. Is he calling his wife the prophetess?
Yeah,
So were they in this together?
that's a good question. She's not mentioned a whole lot. I don't know that she's ever mentioned by name.
And also Uriah is pretty much not doing his job.
No.
I mean, you would think we would have learned more about Uriah, but he didn't speak up to Ahaz at all, apparently. Or if he
No,
did,
I don't think he,
Ahaz
well,
ignored him.
yeah, well, because he's ignored.
He wasn't a very
No,
assertive priest.
not well, I think he was scared silly of him.
And what's
I mean,
interesting...
look at all that stuff in the temple, that would scare me.
What's interesting, you see, and this is kind of the rest of the story, is what does Isaiah do immediately after prophesying this about the Messianic servant and about Assyria being devastated by the time the child grows up? He goes and has a kid. In other words, in a certain sense, he becomes the fulfillment of the prophecy for the immediate situation.
Is that the first child he has?
No, because I think, where was it? I thought we read it earlier that he was taking another child. Yeah. In verse 3, remember back in chapter 7, he says, go out with your son Shear Jashub,
Oh,
which is a name that means a remnant will return.
yeah, but then she's not a virgin. If he went to the prophetess.
Oh,
she
no.
already had one.
Yeah, no. Well, so this is the thing. The prophecy that applies to the day is that by the time a child would grow up.
Oh, okay.
But looking further down the road, who is this child? Well, now this is actually one of the first promises in the book of the prophet Isaiah. And then what you've got in the next chapters is you've got a further description of the Messianic servant who's going to come. In chapter 9, in chapter 11. And then, of course, later on in the prophecy in chapter 42, where the suffering servant is, where the servant is described, and the impact that he'd have in, I think that's, is it 42? And then in 61, where it talks about the lame will walk and the deaf will hear, and through this Messianic servant. And then Isaiah 53, of course, is the suffering servant, where surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, and we've seen him smitten, stricken, and afflicted by God, and God laid on him the iniquity of us all. And so what you've got throughout, this is why they call sometimes the Isaiah the gospel of the Old Testament, because what he does is he reveals more and more and more about the Messianic servant. And this is actually the beginning of that Messianic servant, that God would come to be with his people. Okay? Does that make sense to you? Now you see how all that kind of fits together in that area? No, we're not going to preach about all that on Sunday. What images does Isaiah use in verses 18 to 25 to show what Assyria will do to Judah, and which one's most graphic to you?
Chapter 7.
Yeah, we're in chapter 7, verses 18 to 25. He uses these images. And just think about them. You got the bees and the flies that are going to cover everything. Ravines, crevices in the rocks, thorn bushes, water holes.
Well, I understand taking the beards off, but I don't understand shaving the legs. What's that all about?
Well, you're just removing hair.
And that
And
hair.
you weren't supposed to remove your hair. Remember in the Old Testament, this gets back to my discussion a couple weeks ago about the lady who got mad at me because I grew a beard. And I could show her passages in the Old Testament that even if you had a beard, you weren't supposed to, how you see a lot of men, I know my sons have been this way, where they groom their beards, so it's just really it's short, it's not a full beard, but they use some kind of, well, they use just like a hair clipper
Okay.
to leave it, maybe this long or something like that. And so it's pretty close to the face. Well, if you were a Jew, you weren't supposed to do that. That's Old Testament prohibition. And so to have your head shaved was always considered to be a sign of either mourning or disgrace. Because sometimes when people were mourning, they would shave their heads as well. But here it's a sign of disgrace. Use a razor to cut off basically all of your hair.
Yeah, it says the forcible shaving of beard was considered a great insult.
Mm-hmm.
In times of mourning, a man would shave his own head and beard.
So you would leave him nothing, not even the hair on his body.
So that's the picture, and so he's got these very graphic pictures, which is true of many of the prophets. Yeah, what would you rather have? Bunch of bees and flies, a pestilence, or would you rather have somebody shave your head?
One isn't very comfortable.
So the application kind of questions is what situation are you facing that frightens you now? And how trusting are you of God's hand in that situation?
Actually, it's overwhelming. I have to leave it in God's hands. It's just, one thing, when I was growing up, would you worry about the atomic war, right? Am I ever gonna grow up, have a family or whatever,
When we did all those
Fight those drills.
Drills.
And stuff
Go
like
under your
that.
desk, yeah.
on your desk.
And everybody was worried about that. Well, we've got that going over in Ukraine, and then we've got, I watch that BBC News.
BBC, yeah.
Yeah, and that's incredible at the stuff that's going on and
All over the world.
all over the world, and the fighting and it's not just all the confusion over in the United States, and some of the stuff that's happening in other parts of the world reflect what's going on in the United States. So, we're not the only ones that
Right,
have political
right.
issues. And then what the Secretary of the UN just got, or the EUD, the European Union, the Secretary or something just got fired for stealing money. They found money all over her, different places where she
Oh.
lives and stuff. That was just yesterday. It's like, really? So you can't trust anybody, no
Anybody.
matter where you are in the world, somebody's messing with someone else, no matter what.
It's amazing what kind of greed goes on in this world, and also what kind of base behavior. Like I said, when we were on the trip, I think I said that in at least one of the sermons. I said, yeah, they pointed out where the island was that Epstein owned, where he abused
Girls.
young girls. No, you just, it is, it's scary how evil this world really is. Sometimes it's helpful to be ignorant.
Yeah,
It helps it what?
Helpful to
ignorant.
be ignorant.
yes.
So I didn't watch much news in the last week, so I'm just catching up now. And you're a lot more at peace when you don't know what's going
We have a
on.
nephew who will not watch news. He said that
Yeah,
life is frightening and not
Without-
listening to
yeah.
thousands of things that
Yeah.
are happening.
no, you just, I like to watch BBC, not because I like to know how bad everything is all over the place, but I like to know, I like to believe that the United States of America is not the center of the universe.
And they aren't, according to that. That's
But,
really
yeah.
interesting.
But if you watch our news, we just get all hung up on just what's going on.
See, now they're really not happy with Qatar either, where all the soccer's going, because they're thinking they're doing some underhanded things to get people to invest in them and stuff. It's
I've
just-
seen commercials on, come to Qatar,
Oh,
and
yeah.
all the financial freedom
Yeah.
you'll have. I'm like, really?
No, there's.
Unless you're gay or
there's
lesbian, you don't wanna go to Qatar.
No.
And
it's-
rich,
And, yeah.
rich.
Yeah,
No, it's just incredible, the kind of stuff that's going on. But then more personally, you know, what do you worry about? You worry about your kids growing up in this day and age. You worry about a kid being bullied at school, right? You worry about what things frighten you, you know?
and that's just out of your hands, you know, that's what's frustrating to me is, I mean, every time I see people who are killed or accident or something violent, and I just think of all the people who are left behind, and nobody thinks of them. I mean, yeah, and you know, the funny thing is they let all those plastic balloons out, and the environmentalists never complain
Yeah.
about it because they're not supposed to be doing that. They let out, because, you know, it goes in the ocean and makes a mess. Never do that. And then
Kills
all-
birds.
Letting all the balloons go. And it just hurts to think about these people, missing these people, you know, and it's just, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well,
You
there
hope
is
that they
something you
have
can do
peace.
about it.
You hope, well,
You
hey,
can pray,
well, yeah,
right?
and you hope that they have
Like
that
Karen did,
peace.
and there was the answer.
And I got an immediate response.
No, you pray for peace and discernment, and the thing is where do you turn? And Luther always said it this way, when people would say, well, if I'm in, he said there are no atheists in this world, that everybody has a God. How do you know that? It's whatever you turn to, either in your deepest depths of worry for comfort and help, or whatever you turn to is the highest and most important thing in your life. So whatever that is, that's your God. And everybody has something.
I find it interesting. One time I remember hearing a pastor he was giving a Bible study, and I don't remember the whole thing, but I remember him saying, you know, when people want to curse and swear, they don't say, oh, Buddha.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, you know, Islam, whatever, they're, you know, I don't know. They don't say any of those other gods.
Yeah.
They only speak about the true
Christian
God,
God,
the
yeah.
Christian God, the God that saved us. It's very interesting. So that is the higher power, and everybody, but nobody recognizes that when
Yeah.
they're swearing.
Well, it's kind of funny, well, I don't have my cross on today, but you know that, there's so many of these people that wear crosses all the time. And so William came to me and he says, you know, I want to get a cross like you have, it's actually a crucifix. Because he said, I think that shows that I really do believe in Jesus, because all these other people just wear plain crosses.
Plain crosses.
And I want to say, this is more than just a cross, that's where Jesus, you know, died for our sins. I thought that was interesting that William said that to me, so.
So you're
Well,
getting a
the
for
cross
Christmas.
with the crucifix points
Not for
to
Christmas.
Jesus' death on our behalf. The empty cross is supposed to point to the resurrection, that he's no
Yeah.
longer there.
Yeah, but there's people who wear it all the time.
Yeah,
See, that's his thinking, is they just use it as a piece of jewelry.
Jewelry. Well, I never want to judge what somebody
Yeah,
else
you don't know what's in their
reason.
heart.
You don't know
No,
what's in their heart,
no.
so you got to be careful about that too, because some people do wear it. I wear one. That
Yeah, yeah, you told us.
one of my kids gave
Is
us.
it the wood one that you
No,
got?
this one's a metal one, but I wear this one almost every day.
Yeah, Pastor Poppy was talking about that. He wears one too.
Oh, he's got the wood one.
Yeah, he's got the wooden one that he got in Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, from olive wood.
Yeah.
No, this is from one of my kids. So,
Yeah, and the one I got was from my husband in Italy, so.
when have you found that? And I didn't write this question real well, but when have you found that following your own solution to a problem made it worse? That's what it's supposed to say. I'll do it my way.
That was my sister's life. I'm sorry. I was always frustrated with her. She had so many opportunities. She had a room full of opportunities, maybe 6 doors, and she'd always go through the wall. she always had to do it her way, even though it was the wrong way.
Yeah,
And when everything kind of fell in ruin, she'd just shrug her shoulders and say, oh, and go on to something else stupid. So I think now that she's gone, I say, hallelujah, she won't do anything stupid or idiotic anymore. She's perfect. Thank God. I mean, that's the way I look
well, and the
at it.
hardest thing when somebody does something wrong, I mean, I always had that problem with kids, is that you wanted to, if they did something wrong, you didn't want to afterwards say, I told you so. That doesn't help. That's like kicking somebody when they're down, you know? And so you bite your tongue and say, well, what can we do now? The idea is not to make them feel worse, but to help them walk through a challenging situation so that they learn to make better decisions as they go through life. But it's really tempting to say, I told you it was going to happen. Why didn't you believe me? You know. But it doesn't help the person. And certainly there are times when I thought, well, if I did this, it would be a better choice than doing that. And yeah, didn't always work out that way. And then we see people all the time covering up sin with a thin veneer of virtue. You know, that's frustrating things. They got the guy with the crypto stuff now, and you know, you had all these people were spokespersons, and you know, sad thing is most of them lost money, significant amounts of money, and yet, for whatever reason, people said, "Oh, this looks like a really good thing." So there was a thin veneer, but then you find out, well, it was more like a Ponzi scheme, and people do that all the time. It's called fraud, right? When you're making a promise that isn't actually true, it looks like it could be true, but it's not. Well, what we give thanks to God for is that He did give us a sign. And as I said, Isaiah just continues to unpack what that sign looks like as you go through the Old Testament, and especially in his prophecy, what that sign would do for us, what it meant for God to be with us. And that's what we celebrate this Christmas. So let's close with a word of prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you that you sent us the greatest and best sign of all, the gift of your Son, who is a sign of the seriousness of our sin because he had to go to the cross for us. But he's also a sign of the depth of your love. And when we think of something that's a sign that's from the depths or from the heights above, there's nothing greater than the gift of the love you've given us in your Son, Jesus, our Emmanuel. And we just ask that as we continue to walk through our lives, that you would keep us attuned to the signs that you have placed along the way, signs that you instituted like our baptisms and like coming to the Holy Supper, that point us again and again to your love and grace, that point us again and again to the gift that your Son is, was, and will continue to be to us in our lives. And as we make our journey, help us to be signs that point others to your love and grace in your Son, Jesus. In his name, amen. Well, we will have Bible study next week.
We will?
Well, sure. Why not?
Oh, I thought they said